Welcome back to the Unrevealed Realities, the channel where ordinary walls hide extraordinary truths, and where in our secret chapters, we open doors that were never meant to be found. Some stories are buried by time, others by silence, but tonight, one was buried behind concrete and paint, waiting for the right moment to breathe again. It began on a Tuesday morning that felt painfully familiar to anyone who has ever chased stability and come up just short. Mark Halden was 34, exhausted in the specific way only years of financial pressure can create, and standing in the basement of the cheapest house he could afford. The air smelled damp, like old cardboard and regret. This house wasn't a dream, it was a compromise. A foreclosure property on the edge of town, purchased after 2 layoffs, 1 failed startup, and a divorce that quietly drained what little savings he had left. The realtor had smiled too much during the walkthrough, rushing past questions, brushing off concerns with phrases like, good bones, and, hidden potential. Mark didn't believe in luck anymore. He believed in square footage, mortgage rates, and survival. At 10:12 a.m., he stood alone under a single buzzing bulb, staring at a basement wall that didn't make sense. It wasn't obvious at first. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle inconsistency. The concrete blocks on one side were slightly newer, the mortar cleaner, the paint fresher. Anyone else would have ignored it. But Mark had learned to notice details. Hustle teaches you that, when life takes everything else, it sharpens your eyes. He knocked on the wall with his knuckles. Solid. Then he knocked again, slightly higher. The sound changed, hollow, faint, wrong. The noise echoed back too quickly, like the wall was lying. He told himself to stop. Houses make noises. Old buildings hide imperfections. But curiosity has a way of growing teeth once it bites. That night, at 2:07 a.m., unable to sleep, Mark came back down with a flashlight, a hammer, and the quiet determination of someone who has nothing left to lose. The first crack in the wall was small. Dust spilled onto the floor, carrying a smell that wasn't mold or age, it was stale air, sealed away for decades. He hit again. The concrete gave way faster than expected, collapsing inward instead of outward. Behind it wasn't foundation, it was space. A room, not listed, not mentioned, not disclosed. Mark widened the opening with shaking hands. His flashlight beam slipped through the darkness and landed on a metal filing cabinet, its surface eaten by rust. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes, folders, and objects wrapped in yellowed cloth. The air inside felt heavier, like it had been waiting. The kind of waiting that feels intentional. He stepped inside. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with no windows and no visible ventilation. The walls weren't concrete. They were brick, old brick, blackened by something that looked like smoke damage. On the far wall, carved faintly into the surface, were symbols. Not words, not drawings, patterns that repeated in uneven intervals, like someone had memorized them rather than designed them. Mark didn't understand why his chest felt tight. Nothing jumped out, nothing moved. And yet, every instinct told him this room wasn't forgotten. It was hidden. He opened the filing cabinet. Inside were folders labeled by year, starting in 1961 and ending abruptly in 1987. Property records, newspaper clippings, photographs, police reports, some official, some clearly copied by hand. Names appeared again and again, crossed out in red ink. Addresses circled, times underlined. The same house address, his house, repeated on almost every page. At 3:41 a.m., Mark found the first photograph of the basement. It was taken before the wall existed. The room was open, visible, and occupied. In the center stood a man facing the camera, his expression unreadable, holding a notebook identical to one now sitting on the shelf beside Mark. The name on the back of the photo was Elias Crow. The files painted a picture slowly, cruelly. Elias Crow was not the homeowner. He was a tenant, a city archivist by profession, hired in the 1960s to digitize property records, back when digitize meant photographing documents and cataloging them for future preservation. Crow had access to files most people never saw, and according to police notes, he became obsessed with houses that had irregular histories. Homes with unexplained renovations, missing permits, owners who vanished, including this one. As Mark read deeper, the story darkened. Between 1963 and 1979, 5 families lived in this house. All left abruptly, 2 disappeared entirely, 1 left behind everything: clothes, furniture, food on the stove. Realtors later described the property as problematic, but never dangerous. Complaints of noises, cold spots, walls that seemed to shift. No evidence. No charges. Elias Crow had been investigating the pattern when he vanished in 1988. Mark sat on the basement floor, papers spread around him like fallen leaves, realizing the payoff he'd hoped for. A cheap house, a fresh start, came with a debt no bank had disclosed. The hustle that brought him here had uncovered something buried on purpose. And whatever Elias Crow had learned, he'd decided the only safe place to keep it was inside the house itself. At 5:58 a.m., as sunlight began to leak through the basement windows, Mark noticed something new. A low hum, not electrical, not mechanical, it was coming from behind the far brick wall of the hidden room, rhythmic and faint, like something still working. Still alive, he pressed his ear to the bricks. And heard breathing. Mark didn't call the police. That decision haunted him later, but at the time, survival instinct overpowered reason. Years of struggle had taught him one thing. Systems move slowly, and whatever was behind that wall felt immediate. The breathing wasn't loud, it wasn't frantic, it was steady, patient, as if whatever existed there had learned the value of waiting. At 6:23 a.m., the sound stopped. The silence was worse. Mark returned to the files, flipping faster now, desperation pushing him forward. One folder was thicker than the rest, and labeled except for a single word written in pencil, sealed. Inside were handwritten journals, Elias Crow's own words. The handwriting deteriorated over time, neat at first, then jagged, frantic, slanting off the page as if written in the dark. Crow wrote about the room. About discovering that the house wasn't built around it, the room came first. The house had been constructed to hide it. According to Crow's research, the original structure dated back to the late 1800s, owned by a private society whose name never appeared in official records. Meetings held underground, records removed. When the city expanded, the room was buried beneath new construction, its purpose forgotten by everyone except those who stayed behind. Crow believed the room wasn't storage. It was containment. The journals described a presence, not supernatural, not exactly, but something psychological, something that influenced people over time. Crow wrote that those who stayed in the house long enough began documenting their own lives obsessively, as if compelled to record, catalog, preserve. The room demanded witnesses, archivists, keepers of memory, and when they tried to leave, the house resisted. At 9:14 a.m., Mark noticed the notebook from the photograph was missing from the shelf. It was now sitting open on the basement stairs. The first page was blank. The second page contained a single sentence, written in handwriting that was not Mark's. "You found it because you needed it." Panic finally broke through his control. Mark ran upstairs, out the front door, into daylight that felt unreal. He called his realtor. Straight to voicemail. He called the city records office. No listing existed for the renovation that sealed the basement room. He called the police, reported a hidden room, old files, potential remains. The dispatcher sounded polite, unconcerned, told him an officer would come by, when available. By nightfall, no one came. At 11:48 p.m., the power went out. The notebook was back on the basement table when Mark checked, another sentence added beneath the first. "Elias tried to erase us. You won't." The final realization came slowly, painfully. The payoff wasn't money or answers. It was understanding. This house didn't trap people physically, it absorbed them into its history. Their lives became part of the archive. Their presence extended the room's purpose. Elias Crow hadn't disappeared, he'd been preserved. At 2 a.m., Mark made a choice born of exhaustion and clarity. He gathered the files, the journals, the photographs, and carried them outside. He built a fire in the backyard, watching decades of secrets curl into smoke. The house seemed to exhale as the papers burned. The hum faded. The air grew lighter. By morning, the hidden room was gone. The wall was solid concrete, old and seamless, like it had never been touched. Mark sold the house 3 months later. The listing mentioned a fully renovated basement. No hidden rooms. No irregularities. The realtor smiled the same way his had. Years later, Mark runs a small archival digitization business. He documents forgotten stories, lost records, abandoned histories. He never stays in one place too long. And sometimes, late at night, when the work is quiet, he finds a file on his desk he doesn't remember creating, labeled only with an address he knows by heart. Thank you for watching the Unrevealed Realities. If this story pulled you in, if it made you question what might be hidden behind the walls you trust, don't forget to subscribe, share, and join us again, because some realities remain unrevealed, until someone like you finds them.